Hello everyone, and welcome to the third in the series of bite-sized training for all as part of the celebration of the 50 years of the Protection of Wrecks Act. Today's webinar is Site Security and Preventing Heritage Crime. The presenters today will be Becky Austin and Jenny Kent from MSDS Marine and Heritage.
Thank you very much for coming along to this PWA 50 talk about site security and preventing heritage crime. Before we start, I thought it might be helpful to introduce ourselves so that you know who we are if you haven't met us already. So my name is Becky Austin, and Jenny and I both work for MSDS Marine, a specialist marine and coastal contractor based in Derbyshire in the UK. MSDS have considerable experience in heritage crime work that has been built up over the last 15 years. I started working at MSDS Marine in 2020, and I have worked on projects including writing the MSDS Marine Heritage Crime Training Workshop and co-authoring the Common Enforcement Manual with Plymouth University for Historic England. So before working for MSDS Marine, for 12 years I was the Deputy Receiver of REC for the UK, and I was responsible for dealing with REC material and the prosecution of those who breached the legislation. Jenny previously worked as a specialist coastal and marine archaeologist before taking up a role as a researcher for Leicestershire Police for 8 years. Jenny then moved to MSDS Marine in 2019, and amongst other projects, she's been involved in the development of the site security processes for protected wrecks and the development of forensic markers for wreck sites. So this evening will be a bite-sized snippet of training aimed at giving you some useful tools and knowledge to help protect wreck sites and marine heritage in general. And with this year marking the 50th anniversary of the Protection of Wrecks Act, it seems like a great opportunity to help protect our marine heritage in future years by raising awareness on how to keep our sites secure. So some of the topics that we cover might be familiar to you, but hopefully there'll be something in here new that's new for everybody. We will be covering what marine heritage crime is, including a very brief overview of UK legislation, the activities that might affect marine heritage and the impact heritage crime can have. We'll also look at who polices marine heritage crime, some case studies, how we can help prevent heritage crime, including how to report it, and how we can help to secure our protected sites, and we'll suggest some useful resources that you can access. So what is marine heritage crime? Marine heritage crime is any offence which harms the value of marine heritage assets and their settings. So this could include theft, fraud, criminal damage, or maritime or heritage-specific offences, such as failure to report wreck, diving a protected site without a licence, or removing wreck material without a licence. So the photograph on the left shows a salvage vessel that recovered as scrap the boiler from the battlecruiser HMS Queen Mary, lost during the Battle of Jutland, along with 1,266 of her crew. HMS Queen Mary was still owned by the Ministry of Defence and was sovereign immune, and therefore should not have been salvaged unless consent was given by the Ministry of Defence. This is only intended as a very brief overview of the legislation. We're not going to go into detail as it's extensive and quite complex, as you can see from the slide. But there are several key areas that are associated with marine heritage crime. There are also other offences, like I mentioned before, such as theft and fraud, and the proceeds of crime and breaches of the Firearms Act that can also apply to wreck sites. So the first one, the Merchant Shipping Act 1995, sets out the duties of finders and owners of wreck material in the UK, including the requirement to report any recovered wreck material brought into the UK. This is administered by the Receiver of REC, who's based at the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. The second one, the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009, is centred around environmental preservation, but it now also includes some responsibilities for historic sites and may require a licence to lift items from the seabed using machinery. This piece of legislation is administered by the Marine Management Organisation. The implementation of this legislation has been unpopular for many, involved in salvage especially, as it usually salvage is a very secretive activity due to the competition with other companies. Marine licensing has caused some of the less scrupulous to try and evade the authorities and to work under the radar, as marine licensing, like planning on land, requires the area and the work to be undertaken to be made public before it goes ahead. and there are costs and processing times to take into account. So the other acts relate directly to heritage protection, and these are the Marine Scotland Act in Scotland, the Historic Monuments and Archaeological Objects Order in Northern Ireland, the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Areas Act in England, Wales and Scotland, and the Protection of Wrecks Act Part 1, which deals with historically significant wrecks, and this applies in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and Part 2 relates to dangerous wrecks, which also applies in Scotland. There's also the Protection of Military Remains Act, which applies in all UK countries, as well as to some vessels in international waters. And finally, there is the Treasure Act in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and Treasure Trove in Scotland. So as you can imagine, that's quite a complex list already, and it's a very basic overview, but it's a lot to take in, and it's even difficult for those who regularly work in this area. So what sort of activities affect marine heritage? Well, recreational divers probably make up the largest group of people that access marine heritage at sea. The majority of people dive on a look but don't touch basis. But divers are the eyes and ears of the wreck sites, and we rely on them to help protect otherwise out of reach sites. Maritime archaeologists also access sites and have to abide by the same legislation and licensing requirements as other divers. Those using boats for recreational or commercial purposes, including fishing, also need to be aware of the legislation. In the UK, as I mentioned before, the nature of salvage means that those involved will need to obtain appropriate licenses before undertaking any work. And salvage is a very destructive activity, and whilst it's not illegal in the UK, marine licensing means it's necessary to obtain permission to carry out such work. But it's not just specialist activities that might be affected. There are many intertidal areas along the beach that are protected by marine heritage legislation, and ordinary beachcombers, metal detectorists, or members of the public might find themselves in the vicinity of protected shipwrecks or aircraft, and this is where a license might be required. Or they might find themselves discovering finds that are legally required to be reported to the Receiver of Wreck or the Portable Antiquities Scheme. Marine heritage crime has many impacts. Firstly, it can lead to the irretrievable loss of archaeological information and knowledge. A very important example of where an item and the unique knowledge it holds has been lost is the removal of the torpedo hatch on the Holland 5 submarine. As you may already be aware, the Holland 5 was the first submarine to be commissioned by the Navy and was designed at a time where submarine technology was advancing rapidly. In 2010, it was discovered that the torpedo hatch was missing from the wreck, and to date, this important part of the wreck is still unaccounted for. Another impact is the potential damage of artifacts. The use of explosives or grabs to remove items, for example, can have a serious impact on the structural integrity and the archaeological information held by a site. There have been several cases where explosives have been used on wrecks, including on U-boats and East India Company supply wrecks, to remove items that are either concreted or still well attached. Grabs are also used to indiscriminately remove items of significant marine heritage value, such as the boiler from the HMS Queen Mary that I mentioned in the previous slide. There are also social and emotional impacts to communities associated with heritage assets, including living relatives and local communities. Examples where such an impact has occurred include the removal and sale on the black market of several U-boat propellers and the removal of the Mendy bell, which was not reported to the authorities for several years before being anonymously deposited with the Receiver of Wreck. The sinking of the Mendy is very significant to the nation of South Africa. It was the deadliest maritime disaster to affect the country, so much so that the National Armed Forces Day in South Africa is also known as Mendy Day. After the bell was eventually anonymously deposited with the Receiver of Wreck, it was given to South Africa by the British government. Many wrecks are important last resting places and can hold huge significance for relatives and communities with links to the wreck, as well as being important marine heritage assets. So why does it happen? What is it that motivates people to commit a marine heritage crime? There may be several reasons. Firstly, the person could have made a genuine mistake and may not be aware that the wreck was protected, or may not have been aware that they needed to report what they had found. It's important to make sure you're aware of which sites are protected and keep up to date with newly designated areas by checking online before you dive. In other cases, the person may have deliberately committed crime for financial gain. So removing items from wrecks for scrap value or to sell illegally on the black market are more common than you would imagine, and this can often correlate with metal prices. Non-ferrous metal particularly lasts very well underwater. Another reason someone might commit an offence is because when it comes to finds from shipwrecks, some divers can become quite emotionally attached to the objects they find, as they become part of their personal story and they may hold special memories. For this reason, divers may not report them, as they do not want to be parted from the object, and they are aware that the legislation states that they have no rights to keep it. Unfortunately, for those who hide their recoveries, a lot of these do come to light eventually, and when they may find themselves in worse trouble than having to give back the object. Whilst many shipwreck sites are well known and their locations are publicly available, there are some which may not have been identified or perhaps have been found by an individual or salvage company. And in the case of the latter, some individuals and companies can be very secretive about locations, either because the site has a commercial value or because they don't want other divers to take items from the wreck. This can lead to a reluctance to get the necessary licenses or to report it to the relevant authorities. And finally, the act may have been deliberate to vandalise or damage the site. I think that most of us will find it hard to understand why someone would do this, but it does happen. Who assists in policing marine heritage crime? The answer to this is anyone can assist, including you. Assistance can take place from land or at sea. Some of the organisations administering legislation relating to shipwrecks have powers to assist with enforcement, for example, the police and the receiver of wreck. They may act alone, but more often than not, they'll work in partnership, providing expertise and operational support. They can use their powers to search vessels and premises and seize equipment and objects recovered from wrecks. Other organisations such as the MMO, the MOD and the NCA also have enforcement powers and can assist the heritage agencies and the receiver of wreck. In terms of presence on the water, this is few and far between. Including the UK's islands, there's over 31,000 kilometres making up the UK coastline. A lot of marine heritage is relatively isolated, and beyond this, our territorial waters extend to 12 nautical miles away from the coast, making marine heritage sites very difficult to police. Some agencies do have access to vessels, but these are usually occupied with other operational requirements. If they do witness unusual activity, their evidence can be key to prosecutions. Those on the water include the police and border force, but members of the public using boats or watercraft who witness potential crimes can be extremely important by helping to report marine heritage crime. The police now have dedicated heritage crime liaison officers in many parts of the UK, and other organisations, including Border Force, MMO, have taken part in marine heritage crime training to raise awareness within their organisations. Volunteers and members of the public play an extremely important role in helping to monitor sites and report anything suspicious that they see. The receiver of wreck keeps a database of anything that has been reported from a wreck, so it's possible that recoveries can be checked. In the case study section, we'll look at how members of the public can help by flagging up suspicious activity, which has led to successful prosecutions. So I thought it might be useful to talk about some real-life cases and mention a few recent case studies to provide an example of how everyone working together helps to combat marine heritage crime. Marine heritage crime has received more publicity in recent years, but it isn't a new thing. Although legislation relating to the removal of wreck objects has changed very little over the past 100 years, as scuba diving became more popular in the 60s, a culture developed for removing objects from wrecks, with divers quite often taking a crowbar as standard diving equipment. In more recent years, our understanding and education on the cultural and environmental value of shipwrecks and our awareness of the fact that many are last resting places has meant that the majority of divers now dive on a look but don't touch basis. So the first prosecution relating to a wreck protected under the Protection of Wrecks Act was in 1991, when 4 divers accessed the wreck of the Hazardous off the Sussex coast. And they did this without appropriate licenses, and they were fined £125 each plus costs. Now, I know this doesn't seem much, but it was an important landmark case. In my previous role, I found marine heritage crime taking up a disproportionate amount of my time. And this was largely due to high metal prices, but also a crossover in attitudes towards our marine heritage and its protection. One of these was a landmark case prosecuting divers under the Merchant Shipping Act for failing to report thousands of items, including the U-boat propellers I talked about earlier and bronze cannon. The introduction of the Marine and Coastal Access Act forced salvage companies who had previously been able to operate under the radar to advertise their salvage plans, and some who tried to undermine this ended up with fines and paying costs. In 2016, 2 divers were found guilty of illegally removing artefacts from wrecks protected in Scapa Flow. They were each fined £18,000 and had been witnessed recovering the artefacts by divers on a separate charter boat. And this is why it's so important that other divers report suspicious activity, even if you're not sure, as checks can be made and the information that you provide may be crucial to a case. In another case in 2015, a diver received a 2-year custodial sentence for fraud after providing misleading information on a report form. Following a very long investigation, it was determined that the guns he had recovered were not from the North Sea, as he had originally said, but were actually from the wreck of the London in the Thames estuary, which has since been designated under the Protection of Wrecks Act. The diver was prosecuted, and the cannon were eventually returned from a US buyer to the UK. In 2018, 2 individuals operating a salvage vessel were found guilty of fraud and money laundering, and both received custodial sentences after targeting multiple wrecks, including HMS Hermes. They were found to have recovered large quantities of metal which had been sold for scrap, and the money laundered was through high street stores. Objects sold for scrap included torpedo tubes from submarines, along with non-ferrous metals including boilers, portholes and propellers. I think that one of the things that I would like to stress is that prosecutions are an extremely lengthy and complex process. They have also involved the collaboration of many organisations, experts and members of the public who have provided witness statements, and this partnership has been key to its success. Intelligence for these prosecutions has come from many sources, including enforcement organisations, but the majority of initial intelligence actually comes from volunteers and members of the public. And whilst prosecutions are necessary, these occur after heritage has been removed, and prevention is the preferred option. So now I'm going to hand you over to Jenny, who will talk about how we can use this knowledge to help prevent marine heritage crime taking place in the first place.
Thanks, Becky. Okay, so how can we help prevent it? Due to the isolated locations of many wreck sites out of the sight of land and the heritage itself usually being submerged, it is very difficult to implement surveillance or physical deterrence to protect wreck sites. Even more so given the British weather and underwater visibility. An important step in prevention is awareness and education, which is why we hope this training will provide you with a basic background in how you can play a part in helping protect marine heritage. It is important that people are aware of marine heritage crime, such as enforcement agencies, divers, scrap metal dealers, and other members of the public who use the coast regularly. Initiatives and education drives such as Project Kraken, which encourage members of the public who see something suspicious at the coast to report it. And Heritage Watch, a Police and Historic England initiative which provides advice on heritage crime, are already in place in some areas. There are also several regional heritage crime groups, and of course, the licensees themselves and site security champions play a crucial role. Historic England and MFES Marine have recently launched an initiative around the training and use of site security champions to help secure protected wreck sites around England by providing advice and measures that can be taken to secure sites from unlawful disturbance and the threat of heritage crime. Please do get in touch with us if you are interested in becoming a site security champion. In addition to site security champions, guidance has also been put together for protected wreck licensees to provide support and direction on how to make a site more secure, and I'll explain a bit more about this now. Working alongside Historic England and the Protected Wreck Association, we have developed a number of tools which can be used by volunteers and licensees to take their own steps to help protect and secure their sites. These are all explained in a guidance document which is available on the Protected Wreck Association website, which is currently stored in the members area. Completing a site security document for protected wrecks can help to make licensees and the wider team aware of possible threats and risks depending on the nature of the site. The document helps to summarise different factors affecting the site, taking into account the history, accessibility, who to report unlicensed vessels to, and what to record. All of this can help speed up the process of recording and reporting incidents, as well as providing awareness of what to look for and what to note down. It also explains how and when to take photographs and to make a note who in the team stores these photographs in case the police ever need them. There is a space for noting useful contacts for that specific site, including local contacts as well as national enforcement organisations. The document provides the option of distribution lists for organisations who might find the site security documents useful, such as relevant heritage agencies, the receiver of wreck, and even the local coastwatch station. Raising awareness of the sites with these organisations and with members of the public is key to helping keep a watch on protected sites. To support these measures, a risk assessment calculator was also developed. The calculator is an Excel-based form which gives the wreck site a risk score. This score indicates how at risk the site is from heritage crime and complements the site security form for the site. The calculator takes into account signage, visibility, and other nearby wrecks. There are also some physical deterrents that can be applied to the site. Buoys marking protected sites can help raise awareness to other marine users that a site is present and protected. Many of the buoys deployed at protected wreck sites have protected wreck marked on them. This also makes it more difficult to claim ignorance as a defence. Information boards about the wreck site can also help inform the public that there is a protected wreck in the vicinity and can help raise awareness. MSCS Marine have been working with Historic England to develop forensic markers which can be used on wrecks and the artefacts themselves. I can't go into too much detail about this for obvious security reasons, but I can tell you that in the very near future, forensic markers will be placed on a number of wreck sites. This is a very exciting new tool to use in marine heritage crime prevention, and several different products have been developed as part of the project. The forensic markers are deployed directly onto the site itself and will not only help deter illegal activities, but in the event that a protected wreck is tampered with or the artefacts are removed, they can be used to help prove exactly where the items came from and if they came from a protected wreck. They can also help link individuals to a chain of evidence. In past marine heritage crime cases, it has been a challenge to prove where items of wreck were recovered from, as one porthole or onion bottle looks very much like the next. And so forensic markers can be a very useful tool, especially combined with other digital and forensic evidence. However, I want to stress that it's still important that people report potential marine heritage crimes through the correct channels, which I will talk to you about next. If you see an activity which is potentially a marine heritage crime, how do you report it and who do you report it to? If the crime is still happening and it is occurring on a protected site and you know the divers do not have a licence, call 999 and ask for the police. Take details of the vessel and identifying features, names or markings, and the location of the vessel. Also, if possible, provide details on how many divers are there, any distinctive diving equipment. Any observations may help to identify individuals or the vessels, including appearance, hair colour, height, dry suit makes, or even accents. If it is safe to do so, take photographs and be prepared to share these with the police. If land can be seen on the horizon, this may help provide a location if the location function on the phone is not working. If you can see that they have recovered artefacts, please mention this along with the approximate sizes and whether or not they have been using lifting bags or other equipment. If the crime has already happened and you have discovered it once it has finished taking place, you should take the following steps. Call 101 or report the crime online at www.police.uk. Provide any details you have as per the previous slide, including any obvious identifying features of the people involved or their diving equipment or vessels, or if relevant, any conversations you have overheard. If you wish to remain anonymous though, you can call Crime Stoppers and provide exactly the same information. Here are a few suggestions for what might constitute suspicious behaviour in relation to illegal diving activities. Diving at night can be legitimate and sometimes a night dive is really enjoyable. However, if the dive vessel also seems to be using machinery or lifting equipment, this could be suspicious and should be reported to the Coast Guard or the police through 101. If you are part of the licensed team that look after a protected wreck and you notice unlicensed divers in the vicinity, it is worth taking some photographs and trying to make them aware that there is a site nearby. Some divers have been known to dive just outside the exclusion zone and enter it underwater. Salvage is a legal activity, but using machinery to lift material from the seabed requires a license from the relevant agency. If in doubt, take down the details of the divers and the vessel and refer these to the MMO or Marine Scotland, depending on where you are. It may sound obvious, but something that has happened previously is that dive boats have been seen near a site and have made a rapid exit when other legitimate divers or authorities arrive. Photographs and vessel details can be taken and reported. Many divers like to show their finds online through social media, and in some cases, these are recovered legitimately and are reported to the receiver of wreck. However, some are not. So if you have reason to believe that something has not been reported through the correct channels, it is worth flagging up. For example, when people share photos anonymously, if you have reported an item through the correct channels, there is no need to post it anonymously. There are lots of resources available online to help tackle marine heritage crime. There are useful documents and guidance on the Historic England website, freely available to everyone. And Historic England released some new guidance this week, which is part of a series of 5 documents, and it does have a section on marine heritage crime. The Protected Wreck Association are available to provide advice and guidance to licensees regarding site security and access to documents to help you develop your site security. The association is completely free to join as well. MSDS Marine have in-house expertise and are happy to help offer guidance on marine heritage crime prevention and site security. So please do get in touch with us if you'd like to find out any more. We have come to the end of this piece of bite-sized training and hope you have found it useful and it has encouraged you to help prevent marine heritage crime. In this training, we have looked at what constitutes a marine heritage crime, including the associated legislation, the impact it has and why it happens. Who polices heritage crime? We've looked at some case studies. How we can help prevent marine heritage crime, including the use of forensic markers. We have looked at how we can secure protected wreck sites and marine heritage using risk assessments, available guidance, and through raising awareness. And finally, we have also covered how to report potential marine heritage crime and how to recognise it. Thank you very much for listening. Please do feel free to contact either me or Becky for further information if there's anything you think we can help with.
So thank you, Becky and Jenny, for your presentations, and thank you for Historic England for ensuring that these bite-sized webinars are free for everyone to attend and watch online whenever they like. If you're interested in finding out how to write project proposals for funding, then please check out our next bite-sized training video.